Hello friends! In this project, I'm going to turn these jumbo Littlest pet shop toys into Dib and INVADER Zim. Before anything else, I'm going to remove the paint with 100% acetone. These are secondhand deco pets, and this bear here is colored in with pen, and that's not coming out with acetone. I don't actually have to worry about it because they're going to be completely painted anyway. For this duo, I'm actually going to do a head swap. I think regular size Littlest pet shop have different neck plugs, but the penguin's head fell off with a full plug like this, so I used heat to do the same for the bear. I'm going to just dump a bunch of hot glue to get them nice and secure. If you hold off on doing it at this point, then you'd be able to put some of the foundation stuff in polymer clay. I kind of forgot that, so I guess these are going to be fully done with epoxy poly. Zim is going to be the one with the bear head, and Dib is going to have the penguin head. Off camera, I mutilated these little guys by cutting off their limbs and tails and ears. They're rough around the edges, but I'll fix it after the first couple layers of epoxy. Here I'm using a needle and thread at one point on the bear's head to get a solid reference for where I'm going to poke the holes for Zim's antennae. I'm using a piece of some random higher gauge wire. I didn't intend for it, but it looks like the way that I bent it to not slip out is going to let it be able to be in both a perked and relaxed position. They're going to need some structural wires, so we're going to do it while I can still access the hollow insides. The penguin body no longer has arms, so I'm going to put in wires for the base of those too. I looped the wire to anchor it into the neck plug, and then just let them hang out from where the flippers were. I'll use the factory watermark to mark where I'm going to have their legs be. They're both going to be standing upright, so they're going to be taller than my other INVADER Zim Jumbo LPS. I don't want them to be too tall at all. I considered using the bear's molded legs as reference, but I think that the height of a standard acrylic paint bottle lid is perfect, so I'm going to reference that. I double up the wire for strength and pull them through the holes that I have on the pet's bottoms. I'll also put in a wire for the base of Dib's stupid hair. Now that they've got their structural bases, I'm going to use some epoxy putty to anchor them down. I'm using this Blue Magic Quick Steel Plastic epoxy putty to do that to cover up the majority of the holes. This stuff is pre-measured with parts A and B together, so you just need to cut a slice and mix it. This is meant for repair type stuff, so it hardens and cures quickly. You've only got a couple minutes to get the basic shape down, but it's a good epoxy base that you don't have to wait more than 2 full hours to cure. A tube like this is usually between $6 and $8, but I got this on sale and I used it for my other jumbo pets. It's better for tiny fixes if you're going to use it on art projects. This is my first time using epoxy putty, but I'm going to take it a little slow and use this first pass to just patch anywhere that the Blue Magic didn't cover. Under first impressions, it needs like a caramel and then like an oldish now and later, if that makes any sense. When it's cured, I'm gonna sand these pets smooth with my electric nail file, and I'll do that off camera. I do this every time I add more epoxy so that I have a smooth base every time that I need to sculpt more. It seemed like I didn't need to wait a complete 24 hours before I would be able to sand it, but I waited about like 14 hours at least. I don't know why I was doing that. It might be the humidity here or something else. In the next few rounds of epoxy, I'm going to smooth it over these patches so that it looks like the whole thing is one piece of plastic. I also want to get in a little bit of expression on Zim with this layer of epoxy. This project is for me, so DreamWorks face is completely fine. I'll put a thin sheet over Zim's whole body to get it smooth and consistent, and it'll allow me to add in some guidelines for the look of his tunic, and I'm going to do that with some spare thread so that it comes out straight at the very least. On Dib, I'm also going to add sleeves of the coat and smooth out his face. It's really important that I keep in mind how much of this stuff I'm actually using, especially on the heads. I want for those to still move around when it's done. That being said, Dib also needs a good expression. I was hung up on it because I honestly don't really like Dib. I don't know what would best represent him, but I think one of his funniest faces is his grumpy pout. It also looks like I started working on their legs between these layers. Luckily, it looks like they're going to be able to stand on their own with a little bit of troubleshooting. I noticed that some areas there are like gaps between the plastic and a little bit of chipping. Might be because I didn't let it set all the way. So I tried to use some epoxy glues to smooth it out without dealing with the putty, but the first one that I used was spoiled and the second one set up gummier than I was expecting. I just peeled that off. Before I repaired the patch on Zim's head though, I glued in some magnets where his eyes are going to be, and I made sure that the glue dried before actually moving him. At this point, I had a few days when I wasn't going to be able to do anything with these boys, so I used the opportunity to do some sculpting with Paperclay Delight. First off, I'm bulking out where their hair pieces are going to go with foil. Dib's can be kind of messy, but Zim's is going to need a flat sheet over it to keep it thin. I also made a hollow paper base for Dib's cowlick to keep that lightweight as well. I go over all of this with a bit of Delight and leave it to dry for a while. The cowlick needs some troubleshooting, but it's gonna stay squared off. Like with the epoxy, I'm going to sand it smooth before I add to it. I'm still practicing on this, but the intention is to add the usual LPS fur texture to the hair. The locks of fur are kind of just triangles with one blended edge. Making them wider or thinner or adding a couple curves or carved lines down the length give you different effects. I'm not good at sculpting fur like this yet, but just keep practicing and looking at references for the style that you want and you'll get better at it. Again, I'll sand it down when it's dry so that it's smooth. I'll peel away the foil when they're fully dry so that they're super lightweight. On Dib's cowlick and Zim's wig, I paint on a few layers of Salon Perfect plumping nail polish to strengthen the clay because it's really thin. I'm not at all good at gauging the amount of putty that I need, so sometimes I have leftover that I don't remember what I needed it for, so there's probably an irritating amount of it that cures and it's just wasted at the end. The piles of sanded material sure seem to suggest it, but I'd rather take it all kind of slow and waste material rather than try to smush on harder putty where it wouldn't have worked right. I'm going to use this bit of a sheet of cured Sculpey Ultralight for the base of Dib's trench coat, since it needs to be more lightweight than I fear the epoxy will be. I taped it up to his back and I'm going to set it with the epoxy glue for a strong, lightweight hold. I'm going to trim down the thicker edge and fully attach it with epoxy underneath his rear and on his back. I'm also going to add in the lower trim of his shirt and his glasses now. I left Zim's arms untouched because I was still debating myself on the pose. The upright Victory V is Zimmy enough. I covered the wire in some Delight to get a lightweight base that shouldn't just slip right off. After that's cured, I'll go over it with epoxy to be hard. At the same time, I'm trying to add in Dib's collars. The trench coat is low-key a real mess on the inside because of how I set it up to look upright, but that's on the inside and you can't really see it. A day later and I can start sculpting Zim's fingies and gloves. I hope this little fist looks enough like a Littlest pet shop, but whatever. I'm also going to attach Dib's hair now with epoxy and try to make a nice hairline. I also need to refine his collar a little bit. You may not have seen me do this with Dib's collar. An easy way to get a kind of flatter face to something that you sculpt is to put it on foil or plastic and attach that to the sculpt. I'm doing that here for Zim's collar and sleeves. It's okay that the foil wasn't coming off of the sleeves since all of that is going to be sanded. The shapes of these things only really works in 2D, but the same is true for their total designs. I thought I was ready to start painting, but then I remembered that Dib has ears. Earlier I baked some Sculpey Ultralight inside of the bear's ears that I cut off so that I could get a similar shape and a smaller size. It worked on the right ear, but I had to redo the left one. I used the cured clay as bulk for his briefcase. When they're all cured, they still look too big. I cut off the top and bottom to make them look more squared, and I'll sand them down when the epoxy that I used to attach them cures. On that same note, I also remembered that Zim needs his pack. I was too lazy to record me sculpting it, but it was also made from Ultralight. I'll sand it down like when I do his ears. I had to wait to bake my Sculpey, so in the meantime, I started on Zim's contacts. I had let a few thick layers of glue set over where the shape of his eyes are. I'll carefully peel it off so that I can make it detachable. I got this magnetic eyeliner, and I'm going to paint a few layers onto the inside of the contacts. Hopefully this will be enough to attach to the magnets in his head, and be strong enough to hold them up at all. It works! I'm very happy about that. When I'm confident that the eyeliner is enough, I'll trim the edges to look better. I'll paint the outside with white and mix up a couple of purple tones to paint his iris. I prefer that look. I think maybe the contacts are transparent blue over Zim's actual pupil so that they look purple. I don't know. I'll use the spare paint to throw on a base color for Dib's shirt. Okie dokie, now we can start painting. I masked them off camera and I'm gonna put down the black base first. They've both got plenty on them, so this step basically covers like half of the painting that I need to do. I thought to put a strip of tape down on Zim's wig so that I can give him his cool haircut without having to worry about trying to make part of it transparent or whatever else. I'll paint in his skin color in that area when the black is dry. I want for the different materials on them to have slightly different finishes. I tried to mix matte and enamel black, but the enamel won out on the finish on his pants. So then I'll add some more matte paint in white to get at least a tiny bit of variation in the paint job. I painted his coat with this color. In addition to the paint's finish, I tried to use different varnish mixes to distinguish the black areas. I used straight matte varnish on the coat, watered down matte varnish on his pants, and a few layers of straight glossy on all of the boots and Zim's gloves and Dib's glasses. The hair got watered down matte Duraclear. I'll skip painting varnish onto the green stripe until I'm varnishing the rest of Zim's skin. Now I'm going to paint Zim's outfit. I had sculpted on the texture of his tunic earlier, but I completely ruined it when I tried to sand it with my electric file, so I filled it in. I really like these pinks that I mixed up. The pink on his pack is the same as his collar and sleeves, and I'm very limited on this nice tone, so I'm going to mix up gray and metallic white for the main color of the pack. I do the usual snappy mix-up painty thing, but I get there eventually. For the varnish, I use straight gloss Duraclear mixed with a little bit of metallic paint so that it's shiny and obnoxious and kind of artificial looking. His tunic is watered down matte. As potent as black paint is, it's also kind of easy to mess up with other paint colors. So I cover up those areas on Dib before I paint in the final color of his shirt. If it wasn't obvious, I'm making the show version of Dib. The little emoji on his shirt is harder to do than it would ever seem. I hate the florpus version of Dib, but the comic version is fine. I'll clean up the masks around the eyes before I put in the white base. I use matte here, so I can just sketch on where I want his iris to go. I mixed up darker brown for his outer iris color, and I guess the inner iris is also a little more brown than amber. I'm fine with these colors. I usually give my natural Hispanic versions of things more brownish coloring, which might seem hypocritical in a second. His pupils look kind of gross, but whatever. He doesn't have a visible lash line, but I'm going to blend it up into where his eyebrows are going to go. I'll also put in catch lights now. Let's get Zim looking green. I'll paint as many layers as it takes to be opaque, the usual. I put his body in a plastic baggie so that it stays pristine. Same idea, I masked off the parts of Dib that aren't skin tone. I mixed up a color that I think looks good and started painting it on him. I realized that this is going to take a while to make opaque, so I switched over to using ivory for the base coat. So here's the hypocrisy. I do like that Dib is Mexican, but I prefer the lighter skin tone on him. I'm half Mexican myself, and I tend to make a lot of ambiguously brown / Hispanic characters. I think it's great that the IZ team got to show that the membranes are brown in Florpus in the latter half of the comic, but I think they look better with a paler complexion. Not to say that they aren't brown, but Hispanics do come in nearly every shade there is, including pale skin tones. So in short, Dib can be pale. So anyway, we're getting his skin opaque. What it is, I can carefully go back in and touch up all of the places with overpaint, like along his hairline. I'll use my pencil and a pin for the very edge, but I can use a brush for the bulk. I don't bother mixing up the color that I used, you won't notice the straight black at the end. I'm leaving ample time to dry between one area and the next, and I'm making sure that my hands are completely clean so I don't get any smudges. I'll do the same thing with his glasses, and I'm painting the inside of the rim with black for now. I'll fix up the eyebrows to look better. I put Dib aside to dry 100% completely for sure, so now I'm going to work on Zim's eyes. I really want for him to have the same LPS style eyes, but he doesn't have pupils. So instead, I'm going to paint in the Littlest Pet Shop style eyes in different shades of pinks to emulate how glossy they look. The sclera is going to be dark pink, like the shadowy part. The outer iris is going to be a modified version of his tunic's color. The inner iris is going to be just a little pinker than that, and the pupil will be about 50-50 iris and light pink. I thought I positioned the guide alright, but he was looking way too wall-eyed for my liking, so I tried to fix it along the way until it looked alright. I went back and forth quite a bit, about 4 full hours worth, and kind of lost the sclera / shading color in there, but at least he looks alright now. In between, I'll use any spare paint from this to color his grin. I'm going to have the catch lights be solid light pink, and I think it brings it together and makes it look great. I'm going to try to make Zim's contacts again. The other pair are kind of really chunky and became flatter over the time it took to get here. He's already painted, and I desperately don't want to mess that up, so I'm going to use masking tape and regular Scotch tape to try to get them the right shape and curve to them. Long story short, I thought that they would work better. The iris color I liked more, but they became too heavy somehow, and were even worse with the curvature and the borders. I'm fairly certain that I'd be able to do this best with Delight, but I really don't want to mess them up at all. Oh well, onto the other little accessories either one gets. Earlier I mentioned that I made a base for Dib's briefcase. I tried to get the edges flat and at good angles, and painted it gray. When it's dry, I'm going to paint on the swollen eyeballs logo that you see on it from the episode Battle Dib. To avoid controversy, I also painted the logo from Florpus on the other side.
You don't have to.
I know I don't have to, but I'm a freaking glutton for punishment.
You're right.
I held a pen yesterday for too long and now my hand hurts a lot. For Zim, I wrapped some spare epoxy around a tiny foil cylinder to get a base for a little soda cup. I tried to sand it so that it looked like a fast food cup with a lid. I'm going to paint it in pink and purple, and then I'm going to paint on the standard Irken symbol on the side opposite the straw. I used a pin to do this, but it went way smoother than expected. So then, that's everything. I'm going to show you all my other 2 customs like this, and I'm going to talk a little bit on the results of each of them. Here's the monkey from the painting in Zim's house, looking to the side because the base looked good like that before I customized it. The different shapes and his repositioned ears are done in that blue magic putty that I used earlier, and his tail is wire inside of bendy Sculpey. I spent specifically long to get him as good as I could. The connection at the tail is cracked, and some paint around the eyes is chunky, but he's otherwise among my best customs, I think. Girths, tongue, and zipper are also blue magic putty. I actually edited the base's eyes a little before painting and did consider removing the toes before doing this. I gave him derpy eyes inspired how some Littlest pet shop toys are painted in the factory, with colors to hopefully satisfy fans of regular robot Grr. I like him better in the puppy suit myself, it's more nostalgic for me. Here's Dib. I think he looks like a gorilla. I'm not crazy about him. Technically he's pretty good, but I don't think I had enough inspiration to get him looking like something that I would like. I am glad that his cowlick is so sturdy though, that worked out really well. It's possible that I would come back to fix his face, but it's fine for now. Here's Zim. I think he's pretty good. I'm a little worried about the weight distribution, but he's standing up fine when I get him there. The antenna tips were scratching up the plastic during, and the paint won't stick at the base, but I don't plan on moving them much. On the eyes, you can see that neither pair worked right. His hair is one of my favorite things about his human disguise in this show, but I think maybe I made it too tall for this or something. It doesn't look great to me. Hopefully I can come back to the disguise again at some point and fix it up to look decent, but I'm happy with his alien look, so at least that's good.
I love Alien, I love Predator. They should have a movie.
But I don't want them to fight.
I want them to be friends.